Hello again everyone, this is Steve with Nick's Service out of Emerald Park, Saskatchewan, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about setting up a trigger or a recording for mapping in a GPS system here for a Fendt tractor. This process is going to be very similar regardless of which model you have here, as long as you have a trigger type set up here. You can use this on the Gen 6 tractor as the example I have right here, or you can use this on the older S4s or anything with a variable terminal as well. Setting up a trigger is going to be very similar. Where you find it's going to be different between the models because you have a different terminal. So the quickest way to get in there, the triggers are actually set up in your implement. If you have an ISO device that has a work switch of some sort, as long as the ISO implement is configured correctly, it will bring that work switch trigger into the tractor and trigger as it should. But we're going through an example here that we have an implement that doesn't have a work switch, that doesn't have its own offsets or anything like that, so we have to build the implement. I've already pre-populated an implement here, so I'm going to open up my main menu here and pressing the Rubik's Cube style button here. I'm going to choose my implement. And as you can see right now I have the test implement down here. That's where you'll have all of your implements listed. And then to set up the triggers here, we're going to hit the settings button here. This is where you can edit your implement, offsets and everything like that. It is important if you are using a trigger to make sure that your measurements are correct, not only your width, but also your hitch to pivot point and hitch to toolbar. And that's very important because that's going to be where it's going to be painting. If you have a drawn implement, like a drawbar implement, a clevis implement, that sort of thing, it's going to calculate the turn of the implement based on the pivot point and how much you're turning the tractor and such. So that's going to affect your painting. So in order to set the triggers themselves, we'll scroll down here on the screen. We can see we have the different type of hitch here, so we can select a different kind of hitch, and that's going to determine where in that map that it's going to start painting, and where it's going to show you the implement on the screen itself. So that's going to be important to select the correct one there. Just using a drawbar here as an example. Steered or rigid axle, some manufacturers, even though they have a rigid axle, they may ask you to set it up as a steered axle there just for better mapping performance. It really depends on the implement manufacturer, and it would be a good idea to consult them to make sure that the implement is set up correctly. It's just a matter of flipping back and forth between the two. Just using a steered axle as an example today. And then down here we have our triggers. So we have when the hitch gets to a certain position, when our PTO engages, we have a 12-volt work switch, which is one we can wire into the roof of the tractor here. We have those connectors there. There is a kit available right from Fendt. If you don't have a work switch on your implement, it gives you the harness, it gives you a sensor and some generic hardware to be able to add in that implement work switch to an implement that doesn't already have one if you so choose. We also have the auto steering gauge. So right now, the way I have it set up here, we have our trigger types. We have automatic or manual, or on. So on will paint anytime that the tractor is moving. So it will paint. It's a great example if you want to use, say, if you're going to paint a headland that you don't steer on or don't have any other kind of trigger, automatic trigger, you can just turn that on and it will paint the headlands as you go. And then once we're ready to go into our swaths, we'll change it back to auto here, and then we'll use whatever trigger we have set up here. So the important thing to know about triggers, and this goes for every model of Fendt tractor here, is that any triggers that you have on here will be sequential. And what I mean by that is that the hitch will have to be in the certain position, the PTO will have to be on, the work switch will have to be active, and the auto steer will have to be on before it will start painting. If I just want to run with my auto steer on, I'll have to turn all the other triggers off, otherwise it will not paint correctly here. So right now it will automatically trigger when my auto steer is engaged. If I want my auto steer engaged and my work switch in a specific position, it'll look for both of those things before it will start painting. Further down here we can set what hydraulics we want to trigger on. Same thing, if we have multiple things selected here, it's going to need all of those things to match up before it will actually trigger and paint. So if I just want to trigger on a specific hydraulic remote, we can do that as well. Say if I'm floating an implement to have it contour to the ground while it's floating, I can set the start trigger on float for whatever remote, and then stop on when it stops flowing, or whatever the case may be. So, or when you lift, or whatever the case. So that's sort of the overview of how you set up triggers here on this is a FendtONE terminal, but all Fendt tractors will be very similar. You just find them in a different spot in the terminal there, but they will work out identical. I hope this information was helpful. If you do like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. Thanks.